That opening gives me an anxiety attack every time. So glad I'm past that. In 2015, I got a really amazing opportunity. I got to go to the country of Nepal for the very first time. Here's a picture of me there in case you don't believe me. It was a beautiful country. It was very different from other places that I'd ever been. The landscape was amazing, and it was full of its own customs and traditions that were different from any other place that I'd ever been. And just like any place that you would ever go in the world, if you've ever traveled, you need to understand how to navigate these customs and traditions that people have in their countries so that you don't offend somebody. That is highly probable to do. You can offend someone, or you can sometimes make yourself sick. Now, one of the traditions that they had in this region of like Nepal where I was at, one of the traditions was a tea that they wanted to share with everyone at least once, like with every foreigner that came into their home. This tea went back thousands of years, and it had very practical purposes for the nomadic Nepali and Tibetan people that lived in this region of the world. And you may be thinking like, tea time? That's no big deal, John. Like, why do you have to know how to navigate this? But this is no ordinary tea that we're talking about. This tea was called yak butter tea. Now, this is a picture of yak butter tea. This is though it looks very beautiful right here, it is not. Yak is very close to yuck for a reason, okay? It is fermented dark tea, like a black tea, brewed with a lot of their Himalayan salt. They love their Himalayan salt. And then a fat serving of yak butter would go into that. And when I say fat, I mean big and full of fat, okay? Into this, along with toasted barley, and even, and this is crazy, like they put milk curds then on top of that. Yeah. And when it's made with their locally sourced, it's called ghee is the word. When it's made with their locally sourced ghee or just their homemade yak butter, we've been told that it contains about 500 calories per serving of 8 ounces. So 500 calories per 8-ounce serving. Now, yak butter tea was and is in some places still very useful in their climate that is so very harsh. The air is like very thin. It gets brutally cold, especially in winter times and as you rise in elevation, which the elevation is very high there. And nomadic people, which is what their region is made up of, nomadic people, they drink it because they're outside and it helps keep them warm and it gives them the energy that they need to take care of yaks and goats and everything else that they do. But we're Americans and we have pretty weak stomachs. We've been babied. And consuming an excessive amount of any type of butter tea, which if you don't know this, there's a whole section of just butter tea. You go Google it later. Consuming an excessive amount of any kind of butter tea can result in headaches. It can actually give you insomnia. And shall we just call it stomach discomfort? So you have to know how to navigate this yak butter tea tradition thing, or you can get yourself in trouble. Because you can't avoid it. If you turn it down, you've offended your host, and that's not good, and nobody wants to do that. They don't have very much, and they're going out of their way to provide this thing for you. You can't avoid it. And if you're not careful, you can make yourself like really, really sick if you don't know how to navigate this thing. Now, some of you, I'm sure, are thinking, well, I would just chug it really fast and I would get over it and I would just move on and act like it was no big deal. Well, if you drink it really fast, they think that you really like it. And they will refill your cup. And again, you can't say, no, thank you, and put your hand over your cup like you're at Cracker Barrel and you don't want any more coffee. That doesn't work. I've literally seen them move a hand out of the way as they pour more yak butter tea, and you're like, oh, thank you. Oh, I love it so much. Maybe your strategy is, well, I'll just take little sips, and I'll get away with not drinking much, during the time that I'm there before we leave. Well, you'd be wrong there too, because they have this way of like keeping you at the table until you drink that tea. And so they won't let you leave until you've drank it all. So what do you do, right? Well, luckily for us, when we went, there are people who have been going, to visit this group that we were going to see. We had people who had been there before us, and they tried both of those strategies, chugging it, sipping it, doing whatever, and they'd either failed miserably by getting really sick. I had a friend that he kept chugging it, and he drank 5, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cups of yak butter tea, 2,500 calories. He ended up sick for the rest of the trip with stomach discomfort, if you know what I mean. Or we've had people sit there forever, sipping on this harsh tea for hours until they catch on that we're not leaving until I finish drinking this. And now it's cold yak butter tea that starts to even, it looks like it's fermenting, as it sits there. The play here is actually to sip or drink it down to about half of a cup. To drink it down about half. They won't refill it if you're at half a cup. And then you just kind of grab it every now and then and bring it up to your lips and let it get on your lips. You're like, so good. Like what you do with your kids when you're fooling around, like, hey, let's have a tea party. And you're like, oh, so good, honey. And it's nothing in there or whatever. And then as you're wrapping up your time with your host, you chug the last 4 ounces of that coffee or whatever as you stand up. So you're standing up and you're chugging this and setting it down, and it's like, we're done. I'm already standing up. I'm out of here. It's over with. That's how you navigate yak butter tea as a foreigner in their world. Now, this is the part of the talk when everybody sits here and goes, that's a really great story, John. What in the world does that have to do with parenting in the 21st century? Well, you and I are actually foreigners in a world that our kids are native to. We are foreigners in their digital world. And really what we are immigrants, right? Anyone who is an older millennial, or who is a Gen X like me, or who is a boomer that is hopefully helping to raise grandkids, not raising your own kids. If so, way to go, Abraham, Sarah. Yes, and some of us have migrated pretty well, and we are digitally savvy. I think of myself in that way, especially for being the old heads in the room, that sort of stuff. But we are raising digital natives. This is just their world that they live in. I mean, think about it this way, okay? In many of our schools around in this area, and really in the country anymore, when kids enter kindergarten, they are handed an iPad to begin their school career with. They learn to write their ABCs on a digital screen. They do some coloring on there, and I'm like, you're not coloring, you're touching a screen and it's filling in. It's the thing, But a lot of their interactions, especially throughout elementary school, are on these devices. My wife's a 4th grade teacher. By the time they get into 4th grade, they've got a Chromebook that they're lugging around with them that they have to take care of. Now, I, on the other hand, and some of you, we learned to type on a typewriter, right? And type out, click, 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 click. And if you messed up, you had to scroll it up and take our little friend White out and paint over top of it, and then go back and line it up just right, which was never just right, and try to put the right letter into there. I wrote my ABCs and learned to write them in crayon. Now they make edible crayons that the kids can eat. Those kids used to get sick. Middle school and high school students, their assignments for the most part are turned in digitally through Google Classroom. There's not an inbox that sits on the teacher's desk anymore where they take a piece of paper and they go and they lay it in there and then it gets returned back to you. You have until midnight the night before or that day to turn in your assignment to make sure that it's there, whatever. It's just not what it once was. Lots of kids who are graduating right now around this time of life, they will never set foot inside of a college classroom because their courses are all offered online, and many of them are even offered on demand online, which means that they can just take them whenever they want to. I took one distance course when I was finishing up my degree, and they actually mailed me in the mail, literally, USPS showed up at the door, and they had mailed me all the materials, and then as I did the different assignments, I had to put them in these little folders that were all down inside of there, and I had to mail back the stuff as I finished it for them to grade. I didn't finish that course, by the way. Let's put it like this, okay? If you've ever looked at something that your kid, your grandkid, your niece, your nephew, your next door neighbor's kid, or you just seen something online or whatever, if you've ever looked at something that they're doing or something that is happening and you thought, that's like something from the Jetsons. And all the young kids are like, what's the Jetsons? Well, we hate all of you, okay? If you've ever thought that, you're a foreigner immigrating into their digital world. If Zoom, TikTok, Snapchat, IRL, FaceTime, Bumble, Tinder, Zoosk, or Life 360 are lost concepts on you, either you don't know why they would do that, or you think that I just said a bunch of words and you don't even know what I just said, you are a foreigner immigrating into a digital world. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we to do? How do we navigate this digital world that we are foreigners, that we are migrating into, that we are immigrants in? Well, I guess we just break all the cell phones, right? Turn off the internet, everybody move to the mountains, and it's all done. Thanks for coming. Let's pray. It's not that easy, is it? Even in your own household, it's not that easy. And this is an area that I really can't go to scripture and show you something like this, like, verily Jesus saith unto you, getteth thou rid of all digital devices before thou regretteth it. Like thouest? No. We don't have that. But luckily for us, there is wisdom that is captured that applies throughout space and span of time that can help us as immigrants navigating this digital world that we're not just normally in. And like Greg has been saying all throughout this series overall, and it applies to this concept as well, we are all stewards of the next generation. We're all stewards of the faith of the next generation. And this is one of those places where we need each other so much. We especially need our younger parents that are in the room who are more experienced and have more understanding of this digital world. We need you to engage with and help guide through these waters with more disconnected parents and grandparents. Because, like we've been saying, there is always someone younger you can influence. Not Faircreek, you. There's always someone that you can influence. And what that means is that there are some high schoolers and some college students that are in this room or that are watching online, and you know more about this than all of us put together. You know more about all of this than any of us. And if you were honest with yourself, and you don't have to tell anybody, but just be honest with yourself internally right now, high school, college student, you've either been hurt by, negatively affected by, or you know someone who has been negatively affected by misuse or lack of awareness with this digital world. It's just a thing now. You can, and you have a very unique voice to speak to and to lead the generation that's right behind you more effectively than all of us put together. We are all foreigners in, and we are immigrating and migrating into this world. You've been there. So here's what I want to do with our time today, okay? I want to suggest a principle that King Solomon wrote thousands of years ago, and I want to suggest this to be our guide as we figure out what to do. And then I want to give us some practical advice on how to live out that principle in our lives. And the principle is this, and listen, Solomon, in case you don't know, Solomon is noted all throughout history as like the wisest king who ever lived. For those of us who are Christians, we believe that Solomon asked God for extra wisdom to be able to lead his nation, and God granted him that wisdom to be that king. But it's all throughout history. You can read it anywhere. And so Solomon looks at everything around him, and he says, this is a statement that needs to be made into just culture and into life, and it applied then, and it applies now to us. He said this in Proverbs chapter 27. He said, the prudent see danger, and they take refuge. Now, the only association that most of us make with the word prudent is just the first part of that, with someone being a prude. Basically, someone claiming to, whether or not it's true, someone claiming to be shocked by things of a sexual nature. It's a prude. But this word prudent has a really important synonym, and it's the word wise. In fact, the actual definition of a prudent person is acting with or showing care and thought for the future. So we could say, based off of this, that wise living is realizing that what you do today affects tomorrow. Wise living is realizing that what you do today affects tomorrow. And for those of us who have, a little less tread on the tire, who have a few more years, under our belt, we realize that this is true. This is just true. Unfortunately, you don't realize this is true many times, or in most cases, until it's too late. Until it's already happened, so you look back and say, man, I wish I wouldn't have, or I wish I would have done this instead of that. It's why there's always someone younger that we can influence in our lives. Because wise living, in many cases, comes from evaluated life experience. Not just life experience, not just living and doing things and things going wrong, but evaluated life experience that can teach us. My dad used to say it this way. He would say, you can live and learn, John, or you can listen and learn. And if you're anything like me, you didn't listen many times and you ended up living and learning in many instances and making those mistakes and smacking your face into the wall or the floor. And Solomon says that the wise person who has care for and thinks about their future, that they see the danger or they see the trouble coming and they take refuge, that they go and take refuge. Just like a refugee, they run for cover, they look for safety, they get out of the way of the danger that is right in front of them. So here's essentially what we're saying. We're saying that wise people see trouble coming and they get out of the way. Wise people see trouble coming and they get out of the way. But, and there's always a but, right? But the simple keep going and they pay the penalty. But the simple keep going and they pay the penalty. And this little Hebrew word that has been translated simple here, this is actually a very kind translation by the people who translated the NIV scriptures. Because when this little Hebrew word is used as an adjective, like it is right here describing something, this word ultimately means foolish. Foolish. Which if you just simply translate foolish, it means lacking good sense or judgment. It means unwise. So, if wise living is realizing that what you do today affects tomorrow, if that's wise living, then when we act unwise or when we live unwisely, we're doing the opposite of this. We're living as though tomorrow doesn't matter. We live carelessly. We live carelessly because essentially we could care less about tomorrow. Now, we may have anxiety about tomorrow, about the future of the generation. How are these kids going to grow up in this world? We'll say things like, I'm so glad that I didn't grow up with all this stuff that is distracting and all these problems and everything that can trip me up. I'm so glad I didn't grow up with this. We will worry and we will complain and we will blame social media for all the stuff that it does to us and everything that is out there, but then we don't do anything. And that is living carelessly. And it leaves us to pay the penalty. And not only us, but our kids and our grandkids and our nieces and our nephews and our friends' kids. Because this is another thing that you just instinctively know. Our decisions affect more than just us. Our decisions affect more than just us. And we know this. You've had this experience where someone has made a decision and has it affected all of your plans, it has affected everything that you were thinking about doing, it's affected your day and everything else. Our decisions affect more than just us. So this is us, when we do this is us by our actions saying, I could care less. I'm going to worry about it, but I could care less. It's careless living. It's us, if I could meddle for just a minute, and forgive me, it's us acting like fools. Which I know doesn't feel good. But remember, this isn't me saying this. This is Solomon. It's Solomon who was given wisdom from God beyond anything that anyone had or ever will have. And this includes me too. Because if we look at it and we know that there's something coming, but we don't do anything about it, it's careless living. So let's just pull it all back together for one moment and before we go forward here. Proverbs 27:12, the prudent, the wise, see danger and they take refuge, but the simple, the fool, keeps going and they pay the penalty. And for the sake of our conversation today, I'm just going to restate this for us just really, really plainly, okay? Wise people, they see trouble coming and they get out of the way, but a fool keeps going and suffers harm. And what Solomon is writing here, it's called wisdom literature. All of Proverbs is wisdom literature, thoughts and ideas that lead us to wise living. And this thought right here, or this principle of living wisely, seeing trouble coming and getting out of the way, that then becomes our guide to finding and enacting practical principles of how to actually do this. And I want to, today, with the remaining time, I want to focus on one of these practical principles that if we all put this into place, I believe that it will change our personal interactions with the digital world, especially when it comes to social media, and it will change our attitudes, which your attitude is just a reflection of your heart, something that's going on inside of you. It will change our attitudes, it will change our actions, it'll change our behaviors, it'll change our relationships as we collectively raise these digital natives in this digital world. Our practical guide to wise living today is given to us by Paul. And Paul is writing to a group of people, and he's realizing that the world is changing. Even though this is the first century, he's looking around like the only thing that is constant is that everything is changing, okay? He sees that the world around him is changing, even in this first century, and he gives them a warning and a practical application to go along with that warning. Paul writes this in Ephesians chapter 5 to the people at Ephesus. He says, be very careful then, so not careless, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, and here we're at again, not as unwise, but as wise. Be careful not to be unwise, and remember, being unwise is living as if the decisions you make today, that they don't affect tomorrow. That'd be unwise living. And how does he say to do that? Well, he says that we do that by making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Now, making the most of every opportunity, or as I learned this in another translation when I was growing up, this idea of redeeming the time. Redeeming the time. And this idea of redeem, it's really simple. It's just this thought of gaining or regaining possession of something. Gaining or regaining possession of something. That's what it means to redeem. Making the most of opportunities, redeeming or regaining the time because the days, it says, are evil. And listen, you got to understand, this is not an end time statement, okay? This was written in the first century. This is not an end time statement. It's just a fact that has been true for all time, that there is evil crouching, waiting to get you always. Another statement my dad used to say is, don't go looking for trouble. Trouble's already looking for you. There's evil crouching and waiting. I've been describing it this week around the office like this. If you knew that you had a snake loose in your house, would you just go to bed? No way. And I know there are some of you who would disagree with me, and you're having this dialogue inside of your head right now, and you're asking, well, what kind of snake is it? Is it poisonous? Is it big? Is it going to choke me? Is it going to do all this stuff? Listen, you're courageous, and you're a snake whisperer, and congrats, okay? But for the majority of us, no stinking way are we going to bed if we know that there's a snake loose in our house. We would stay up half the night looking for the snake. We would go stay the night with a friend. We would pay money to rent a hotel room to get out of there if we really had to go to sleep. Or we would sleep in our car before we just went to bed with the snake roaming around in the house. Now, have you ever slept in a house with a snake on the loose? Possibly, especially if you've traveled. I went to Nepal. At one point, I slept in a barn on the side of one of the Annapurna Mountains. I bet there was a snake in there. The place is really drafty. But no one told me. So I went to bed, and I tried to not think about it. But I'm here to tell you today that there is a snake that is loose in your house, and it's that whole digital world that is out there trying to get you. And once you know that, you have to do something about it. And if you're not convinced, let me share some statistics with you. The Pew Research Center in 2018 did a survey of U.S. teens and determined that 1 in 6 teenagers, 1 in 6, had experienced at least one of these 6 different forms of abusive behavior online. They'd either experience name calling online. Again, you used to have to either call somebody or get in front of their face to name call them, and now you can do it from far, far distances. Spreading false rumors, so someone saying something about another person that's not true, all online. Receiving unsolicited explicit images, so someone sending them a nasty picture online some way that they didn't want. I think this is really creepy. Having their activities and whereabouts tracked by someone other than a parent. Ugh. Someone's watching. Or having someone making physical threats. Again, you used to have to get in front of somebody's face to do this. And now it's happening digitally. Or having explicit images of them shared without their consent, meaning that they had sent something to someone that they shouldn't have, and now it's been spread around and given to everyone. 1 in 6 teenagers. And listen, in 2018, this is 2022. It's worse now, I promise you. There's a Barna study that came out, recently, and it shows a lot of similar things, but not quite as stark as this. And it's just getting worse. This same survey also found that 90% of teens believe that online harassment is a problem, which is good. It's like, okay, good, you're paying attention. In fact, 63%, and listen, this is like different cross sections of kids, so don't try to add this up and go, wait a second. 63% of kids, 63% of them identify it as a major problem. As a major problem. Yet, inside of this study, they start asking them different questions, and in this Pew Research survey of teenagers, it reveals that only 24% of teens, only 24% of them believe that social media has a generally negative effect. Now, wait a minute, what? 90% of you believe that online harassment is a problem. 1 in 6 of you have experienced one of those 6 things of all that stuff happening inside of there. You've seen friends, you've been a part of all this stuff, but now all of a sudden only 24% of teens believe that social media has a generally negative effect. And it doesn't get any better, because then 31% of them say that its effect is positive. And meanwhile, there's 45% of them that are like, well, I can't lie that bad. There's something that's going on here, but I don't want my phone to be taken away, or I don't want to have to get off Snapchat or anything else. So 45% of them believe that its impact is neither positive nor negative. It's just a bust. That doesn't add up to me. It shouldn't add up to you. Because meanwhile, according to multiple studies about effects of social media on the brain, by everyone from Harvard University through the Centers for Disease and Addiction, it says that self-disclosure, which is just talking about yourself online and having these positive reactions from people come in, self-disclosure on social media, putting yourself out there and people responding, lights up the same part of the brain and releases dopamine into our brains and into our systems, just like an addictive substance. It's basically the same as taking a hit of cocaine, taking a bump of cocaine. That's what it does. Listen, every notification, whether it's a text message, a like that comes in on Instagram, a Facebook notification about something, a Snapchat that comes from a friend, a share of a TikTok video that has been made and sent around, and we see, all that stuff. All of that has the potential to be a positive social stimulus and to create a dopamine influx inside of us. That should be concerning. That should be concerning to us. And If Solomon's principle to live wisely, to think about the future is true, and if Paul's encouragement to make the most of the time to redeem or to regain that time because there's a snake in our midst, we have to more emphatically ask ourselves, what do we really do? What do we really do? Now, as with everything, I believe there are appropriate responses to the stuff, to which I know every teenager in the room is like holding their breath right now. You know, some of them are even thinking, man, I used to like this guy, but he's ruined everything. In fact, I even had a girl after last service come up and say, I was about to get social media today. I can't believe you did this. Some of them are probably Googling feverishly like the plans for the Men in Black neuralizer and are like trying to figure out if they can get all the parts to make it to flashy thing their parents to get them to forget about this before it. So, but listen, don't worry, right? Everybody take a deep breath. Because I don't suggest that you stick your head in the sand whether you're a parent or a kid. A parent just acting like nothing's going on. A kid, acting like if I don't show any signs of problems, there's no big deal. I don't suggest you stick your head in the sand either way. I also don't suggest that you run from it. Smartphones and social media apps are not going anywhere anytime soon. And they do have the potential to be useful inside of them. They have that potential. So it's up to us as the users to decide how much of our time we want to dedicate to these things. And unless the advertisement-based profit model changes, social and digital media companies will continue to do everything possible to keep our eyes glued to the screen as often as possible. And then they use these algorithms, if you're not aware of this, to leverage our dopamine-driven reward circuitry that God put inside of us. And they stack the cards and even our own brains against us. So it's not going anywhere. We've got to learn how to appropriately navigate this. So I do suggest, as I believe Solomon would if he were here, as I believe that Paul would if he could talk to us, as well as many things that Jesus said that I didn't even get into today. I do suggest that you know where this snake is and that you know what it's up to inside of your family. I suggest you do that. Greg introduced us to an idea last week when he challenged us to imagine the end. He told us to imagine the end. I want to build on that just a little bit further, build on that idea just a little bit further. What if we began to parent with the ultimate, not the immediate in mind? What if we began to parent with the ultimate, not the immediate in line, especially as it relates to this digital world? What if instead of having a careless attitude that either acts like nothing is going on, sticking our heads in the sand, and letting just anything go and anything happen, what if instead of throwing devices at kids at a very early age to be that digital babysitter, hey, mommy needs a little alone time, go sit in front of the TV. Hey, we're trying to have a really nice meal here. You're very loud, you're very distractive. Here, watch this little thing that will mesmerize you for a little bit of time. Or the other side of this is also living carelessly by simply just being fully prohibitive because we don't understand it. And then ultimately raising kids that aren't prepared for what's out there in life. And when they have to start making their own decisions, they can't make wise decisions because they've never interacted. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate? What is the ultimate? Now, I would suggest that the ultimate here is to have kids who can navigate this digital world successfully. That they could know how to choose wisely so that when they are adults, and that's inevitable, no matter how young your kid is, they will be an adult someday, that they can live without regret in their life. But it starts with us as the adults in their lives. So what if we lived wisely, doing the hard work? And listen, what I'm about to suggest to you is hard work. What if we lived wisely, doing the hard work to try and to understand this digital world and the effects of this digital world on not only our kids, but on ourselves as well? For too many adults that are sitting in this room, we're like the immigrants that come from a third world country to America, and we see the bright lights, and we've lost perspective, and we maybe find ourselves underwater where we're addicted to the social media and all the digital things and stuff that is out there. And really, we need to evaluate our own interaction with this strange digital world and how it affects us as well. In fact, like in first service, I talked to the people who are watching online. I bet if you're watching online, there have been notifications or emails or deal alerts from Amazon, or maybe you've heard your email ding, over and over again. And whenever we watch, you guys have probably done this in meetings with work and stuff, and all that stuff starts to happen. And then you open a new tab and you start, searching Amazon for that thing that you just can't live without. Or pulling up your own social media and seeing what's going on. And honestly, with smartphones today, some of you have possibly in the room, you felt your phone vibrate. And there's notifications that are there, and you've been tempted to, or maybe you've actually gone into, your pocket and gotten your phone and responded, or maybe you made an Amazon order for something that you forgot that you needed this next week, or maybe you got on Grubhub and you ordered your food and it's going to be at your house when you get home. Like, I don't know. Like, there's all that stuff's available right now. And listen, if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say that stuff, you either still use a rotary phone, you aren't paying attention in life, or you're just fooling yourself. And listen, I'm not going to stand here and try to assume that I can tell you what is best for you and your family to actually do when it comes to participating in social media and online activities and other things like that, or how much screen time do you allow for you or for your kids, or whatever else. Like, there's so many different variables that come into this. But I am going to say this one thing: start with yourself, not your spouse. Keep your elbows to yourself. Not with your kids. Don't give them the stink eye. Not with just the kids that you have influence on. Evaluate your own interactions, your own reactions, your own usage when it comes to this. Evaluate how all of this stuff makes you feel. Ask yourself, does it really fulfill you? I have a feeling if you ask that honestly, you'll say no. Ask someone you trust that really, truly loves you, who will be brutally honest with you. Ask them to evaluate you. Do you want to blow your kids' minds? Ask them to evaluate you. Ask your kids to evaluate your social media and digital online usage and what you do. And leave everything open. Leave it open to all discussions: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, like all that stuff, but also YouTube and Netflix and Hulu, all the pluses, including the Disney Plus. Invite insight to your news consumption, because there's so much of that is digital anymore. We had the first kind of part of the digital world was when we had the 24 news cycle come. Now the 24-hour news cycle is in your pocket, and notifications go off, and it's telling you about all the troubles in the world and over and over and over again, and it brings anxiety into your life. Ask your kids to evaluate how much are you consuming news in your life. Ask them how often they see you open email looking for a work email. Or do you divert your attention while you're at the dinner table, or maybe when you're out with and it brings anxiety into your life? Ask your kids to evaluate friends or whatever. And I know you take your phone and you turn it upside down and you set it on the table because you really love your friend that is there, but it's still a barrier between you. You're not saying I love you because you turned it over. Talk about how all these things affect you really. And I believe if you do that and make the changes that you need to regain the time, it will create the opportunity to have an open and ongoing dialogue with your kids and with the kids that you have influence on. And that's the point of this, right? Because the way to live wisely is by regaining possession of the influence that we have on the next generation. So do the hard work. This is the way that we do this. Do the hard work. Investigate this digital world, its effect on your heart and relationships, and let's regain possession of the time and influence we have by living wisely. Because, like we've been saying, what happens at home, right, is way more important than what happens here on Sunday. And imagine with me a generation that can utilize but not be desensitized or destroyed by this digital world. It doesn't matter if we've done it right up until this point. That really doesn't matter. We can all start today together. In a few minutes, we're going to sing a song. And while we sing this song, I want to encourage you to take an evaluation of your heart. What are you feeling right now? What are those emotions? Name those things and then begin to let go of them, because the emotions that we have about this stuff, it's just going to cloud us from taking the appropriate steps that we need to take in our lives. The second verse of the song says, I want to be near to your heart, loving the world and hating the dark. And listen, Jesus followers in the room, this is to be our posture towards everything. This was Jesus' posture towards the world that he lived in. He was in the world, but he was not caught up in the world. So take any of that anxiety about this world that you may not understand, take any of that fear about getting this wrong, take any of that regret that you have of you feel like you've gotten it wrong up until this point, take anything you need to and confess it in these next few moments and focus on that and